All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Ronnie Koch. I'm a technical product manager with Blue Turtle, and I'm here to welcome you to this webinar. It is going to be a short webinar, so all participants are on mute. If we have time at the end, we will have a Q&A, so please use the Q&A facility for that. And as I said earlier, there will be a post-webinar survey that will be emailed to you. If you're one of the first 10 to respond, you'll be able to enter the draw for a small gift. Now, I'd like to introduce Yuki Abel. He's an industry veteran with a variety of roles, from deep technical R&D with startups to roles at well-known companies such as Cisco and Nokia Networks. He is now Vice President of Product Management at Hysolate, and it's in this role that he's our speaker today. With that, and not much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Yuki for the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie, and you saved me the introduction of myself, so thank you for that, and thank you, Blue Turtle, for hosting us on this webinar. Today, we're going to talk about isolated workspace-as-a-service, which is what Hysolate offers to customers. We're going to talk a little bit about the reality that we're facing today and the problems that we are coming to solve. We'll talk about the product fundamentals. I'll give you a short demo, and finally, we'll talk also about the different use cases, the business use cases that we aim at solving by the product, and hopefully we'll have time for Q&A, although it's tight. So let's kick this off and talk a little bit about the reality that we are facing, and we call it the secure endpoint dilemma, and it has three main aspects to it. The first one is the security aspect. Endpoints have always been the beachhead for attacks against the organization. 70% of the breaches start with an endpoint, which is why this is a focus of security teams across all organizations. If you look at operating systems, the operating system that most of us are using is more than 30 years old. It has tens of millions of lines of code, and on a monthly basis, it's being patched with critical vulnerabilities. Add to that all sorts of applications that introduce vulnerabilities, and you understand why security team have it as top of mind on their agendas. The fact that workforce is becoming remote does not improve the situation. It actually introduces additional attack vectors with workers that are remote from the IT teams and security teams. Second part of the equation is productivity. Productivity is why businesses have employees, but unfortunately, the security posture that organizations would like to adopt actually contradicts some of these productivity initiatives that would like to get to. So, for example, users cannot use the web and the cloud because their security organizations are blocking parts of those services that they don't have control on, and they are concerned about introducing malware or allowing for data exfiltration. For the same reason, those users have a limited choice of operating systems, of applications and plugins, which limits them in doing their jobs if they want to do collaboration, video conferencing, and so on and so forth. And also here, the fact that users are remote and need to use more tools in order to be productive does not help. And finally, the final part of the equation is the IT part of the house. Endpoints have always been a high TCO consumer. Not only the cost of hardware and software, but also the overhead of handling, controlling all sorts of exceptions that users are asking for in order to be able to use services, all sorts of alerts that come up in scenes that they have to be filtered out. And again, here, the fact that users are now remote and they cannot be supported on site does not simplify the situation. if we look a little bit about real life data, these are results from a recent survey that Hysolate conducted together with Team 8 with 70 CISOs. And this is exactly what we were expecting. So there are lots of limitations that are imposed on users in organizations. 62% of respondents restrict web browsing. 70% don't allow installing third-party applications. In fact, 80% don't allow users with admin rights. So those users that might want to use third-party applications in order to collaborate, to do web conferencing, to share content, are not allowed to do that. This is severely restricting. Let's look at the part of how remote works comes into the mix, and this is an AT&T report. We're seeing that 35% of respondents are using devices for both work and personal use. We have mixed usage, which is a potential for data exfiltration and introduction of malware into corporate services. 24% of respondents are sharing or storing sensitive content in cloud services that are not sanctioned by the organization. And finally, 18% have mixed usage, not between personal and business, but rather across multiple members of the family. Right, something that definitely can cause a headache to security teams. And while we could have thought that remote work is a 2020 thing, right? It's COVID and all this crisis that came in and forced everyone to go remote. It looks like it's going to last a bit longer, and it's here to stay. If you look at remote workers, they do not believe that they will get into the office in the same way that they have been there in the past. And those employees, maybe it's part of also being part of a new generation, they demand for more IT freedom and are not willing to accept those very strict guidelines from security teams that allow them to only use certain applications and not let them do whatever they feel they need in order to be productive. So this is, so to speak, an overview of the reality that Hysolate builds its solution towards. And Hysolate solution, Isolated Workspace as a Service, is essentially creating an isolated workspace on corporate devices, on non-corporate endpoints, and we'll touch upon the use cases later on. Do it in minutes, manage them from the cloud. That's the essence of the proposition. Let's dive a bit deeper on what it actually is. Isolated Workspace as a Service is a local virtual machine that is provisioned on user devices. It provides you with strong VM-based isolation. So that's the security aspect. It does not require you to install or manage an additional operating system image because of technology that we're using that allows us to build on top of the underlying host operating system. You're able to deploy it en masse to all your employees within minutes, literally minutes, using a small size installer. And finally, it doesn't require you to have a data center or all sorts of bandwidth costs that are associated with other solutions that are intended to solve a similar problem. Let's talk a little bit deeper about the features. First and foremost, security. With Hysolate, you have fine-grained security control on pretty much every aspect of the solution of this isolated workspace. You have the ability to define fine-grained networking rules, simply a firewall built into the product that allows you to define which networks are allowed for to access from the workspace, and making sure that this isolation extends also into the network and is not only on the endpoint. It allows you to control the transfer of content between this isolated workspace and your primary environment. You could decide which type of content you allow to transfer and in which direction, and these things can vary depending on the use case that you're trying to address. You can control the external devices policy. You might want nothing in your workspace, so you could block all USB devices from being connected to the workspace, or you would want to allow a subset or ask the user what he wants to do. Same goes for webcams and printers. Everything within the workspace that is user data is encrypted with BitLocker. So this is a protection that you get to your data. And finally, of course, when an organization no longer wants the workspace on top of an employee's device, you can simply, within a click of a button, completely wipe it. So your data is safe even when the relationship with the individual using the data is terminated. Finally, there are also all sorts of security controls. So, for example, we're blocking a user from logging keystrokes or screenshotting the workspace. And we have all sorts of tampering mechanisms that make sure that users that are malintended are not able to do or are not able to achieve anything when they're using Workspace. The other piece of the puzzle is user experience, and this is something we take pride in. We created Hysolate Workspace as a simple and intuitive extension of the user's workstation, and I'll show you that in a moment in the demo. It's something you can simply switch into the workspace really quickly using a hotkey. You have a user experience that is consistent with your primary environment, time, language, regional settings, everything. And it does not feel like, although I told you that that's a virtual machine, it does not feel like another operating system that you have to manage and take care of. It actually looks like a small portion, a workspace as it is, that is very lightweight, and it simply invites you to do to go ahead and do the designated tasks in it. The IT side of the house, we're talking about quick and simple deployment. It's a lightweight installer. You simply download it from the cloud, literally 200 megs of an installer. You can use it with standard deployment systems such as SCCM, Intune, AirWatch, if you're an IT organization to deploy to user devices. There's no need for an OS image or license. I mentioned that, but maybe dive a bit deeper into it, where our technology actually uses the ability to map to the underlying operating system, Windows 10 operating system, and inherit this operating system and its patching level and use it within the VM. So in terms of the need for managing and patching another operating system, this simply does not exist. Of course, any Windows 10 operating system and very basic hardware requirements, 8 gigabytes of RAM and virtualization enabled in the machine BIOS, which is something that you would get out of any machine that you purchase over the past 5 years or even more than that. Manageability and other aspects of IT. As mentioned, the concept is of a SaaS managed platform. So all endpoints are managed from the cloud. If you are a customer of ours, we don't need to provision software on top of servers. This is literally a few minutes process of creating a new tenant for a customer and getting him up and running in the cloud. And once this is done, the IT team can easily provision endpoint devices with Workspace using standard management practices. It could use local identity system to integrate with and uses existing Intune or SCCM in order to deploy the system. A couple of additional aspects that are worth mentioning. Applications. Of course, you as an IT team, you might want applications, you want to control applications that are installed in the workspace. So it's very simple to do that. You simply decide on the packages that you want to assign to each user or user group. And these applications are being assigned and installed inside the workspace. And of course, you have full control of user behavior depending on the use case. And I'll show you that in a moment when I open up the Hysolate console. So before I proceed into the use case, maybe I'll show you a quick demo of how Hysolate Workspace looks like. And as you might have imagined, I'm running a Hysolate workspace on my machine. And as you can see right now, this is my primary operating system. I have a blue, that's why what my IT admin provisioned for me. I'm only allowed to do that much in this operating system. Not everything is being allowed. However, I do have a Hysolate workspace installed on my machine. And now I'll use a hotkey in order to switch into it. All right, let's. As you can see, we have a different desktop, but everything else is very similar. You see that all settings are being inherited from the underlying operating system. So it simply looks like an extension of the operating system. If I look at the programs that are being installed, it's just a small set of applications that my administrator believed that I would need in my workspace. These are not all the organizational applications. And if I look at the folder structure, right, the folders are not the C drive and a complicated operating system, but only those named standard folders that I use in order to store my downloads and documents and pictures. Now let's look a little bit at the user usage profile. As I mentioned, the way this solution is being used, I'll show you later, we'll call it productivity, which means that I have a primary operating system that is dedicated for corporate work. However, I have the ability to do other stuff in a more permissive way in my productivity workspace. So for example, my admin would not want me to open PDF files which could be malicious in my primary operating system. So if I go ahead and try to open it, the system will immediately identify it and ask me if I would like to transfer it to the workspace. Once I do that, it will immediately be transferred to the workspace and launch in the workspace. And if it is an infected document, nothing that happens would get into the corporate operating system. And by the way, what I haven't mentioned is that Workspace is non-persistent. So even if I get infected, the next time that I boot my machine, Workspace will start from scratch with no infection, so malware cannot persist. Another aspect of usability is typically web browsing. As I mentioned, not everything is allowed on my corporate environment. So if I try, for example, to browse CNN.com and use a news site, it will be blocked by my corporate proxy. I hope you were able to see that. However, when this block page comes up, I get immediately redirected to the workspace where my browser is being launched, and I'm able to access the content that I was intended to launch. So the workflow is unaffected and everything is streamlined. So that was a brief overview of how I use the workspace. Let me switch back into my corporate environment and show you how the management console looks like. This is the management. This is the Hysolate Management Console, or HMC in short. This is where I control my entire workspace deployment. I have the ability to configure policies, for example, talking about transfer policies. This is where I control which type of content is being transferred across from the primary environment to the workspace and back. I can, of course, control the how the external devices policy and decide that USB devices can go or cannot go into the workspace. I can control the network policies, and I can also decide which applications I'm provisioning to each and every group of users. Of course, I can assign different policies to different groups of users. So that was quick. I guess we can dive deeper into management in another dedicated webinar. But I'd also like to talk a little bit about the use cases that we're addressing with Hysolate Workspace. We see three primary use cases or use case families which we are addressing with Hysolate Workspace. The first one is called Hysolate for BYODs. In this scenario, we're talking about users that have unmanaged corporate devices, and me as an organization, I would like to give them a bubble where all my organizational apps are contained, nothing comes in, nothing goes out, I have full control of it. The second family is Hysolate for corporate managed devices, and this is intended for organizations that have a relatively locked down corporate device for their employees. However, they recognize the need for employees to be able to do more than what IT has sanctioned them, and they would like to introduce a workspace where all those disallowed corporate activities could be taken place. Finally, we have Hysolate for privileged access. We're talking about users that are doing highly privileged stuff beyond corporate access. It could be IT admins, financial users, and so on and so forth. And we would like to let those users do their highly privileged operations, but in the same time, be able to do their corporate work, right? Because if I'm an IT admin, at the same time, I need to be able to read my email and use corporate applications. In a bit more detail and also a bit on how we structure the architecture depending on the use case. In Hysolate for BYODs, which I mentioned, right, that's a list of the use case. There could be a zillion use cases of unmanaged devices. This could be your own employees working from home using BYODs, third parties that need to access your organization, subsidiary and M&A, you name it. The architecture that we will, the workspace architecture that we will use in such a case is on top of the unmanaged operating system that we don't control and we assume is infected, we will provision a corporate managed local VM, a workspace where we will run corporate apps. It would have the corporate security stack. It would have network access that would be on the network again, that allows connecting only to a corporate network. It could be zero trust access. You can decide depending on the use case. A typical configuration would consist of no admin rights, preventing of copying and pasting or between the two spaces, networking restricted, no USB devices, and of course there's the remote wipe on demand that you can introduce. If we're looking about Hysolate for corporate managed devices, and again, there are a lot of use cases that we can look at. This could be knowledge workers of many kinds, researchers, developers, road warriors, may be less relevant for the era that we're living in today, but this will come back soon. And customer support agents. All these users, everyone in his specific theme, need to be able to use applications that are typically not allowed in a corporate environment and would like to allow that in using Hysolate Workspace. So the architecture here would be kind of the reverse of what I showed you before. Here we're talking about the restricted corporate operating system running on the bare metal. And on top of it, we're provisioning a less restricted local VM as the workspace. This is where a user would have local admin rights and the ability to access all sorts of websites. And you can imagine that he can install many applications over there and use it for collaboration and communication just the way he would want to do. Finally, we have Hysolate for privileged access. Again, you can imagine all those cohorts of users that have roles that are highly privileged. And for those users, we would want, on top of their lockdown operating system that has access only to the privileged network, we would want to provision a corporate local virtual machine that has access to the corporate network, and they can have and there they can run their corporate applications. So while they do their IT administration or financial work or SCADA administration on top of the locked host, they could switch into the workspace and then access the corporate applications, do their email, do all the stuff in a single operating system. So just to conclude, the pillars of the solution introduced by Hysolate, We're talking about the ability to deploy at scale and manage from the cloud, let's say the rapid theme. We're talking about the native user experience, making sure that users are happy, and also the security teams are kept happy because we are introducing a strong virtualization-based OS security. So I did rush through, and I came out almost on time. I'll hand it back to you, Ronnie, and see if we have time and if we have questions that we can answer.
Thanks a lot, Yuki. I think in the interest of time, any questions that we'll have, we'll respond via email. I thank you for your attendance. I want to remind you of the survey. Those of you that haven't sent in your names in the chat, please do so. The first 10 delegates who respond to our post-webinar survey will stand a chance to win a great work from home prize bundle. Again, thank you very much for your attendance.